Okay, so we are. Good afternoon. Well, some good morning. I know that some friend of mine in the US, they actually felt motivated to dial in as well, Steve. So you're not going to have only a Spanish original audience. You're going to have a Spanish original audience. You're going to have some European folks, and you're going to have some US-based folks.
Nice.
We're here interviewing Steve Hall. And I'm going to do the intro very short because you will see what speaks for him is all the actions, the things that he's put in practice, the things that actually he developed and put in forward in a company called driversselect. I gotta be honest, as a European, I had to Google it. What does driversselect actually do? And you will find out that it's actually a pretty sizable business that Steve built, I guess, pretty much from scratch, merged it, and then sold it with other companies. And up until now, it's actually a $1 billion company. I had the pleasure reading through some interviews and actually talking to Steve, and I would call him very much a conscious capitalist from the heart. Not because he copied a methodology, because it just came out of his heart. That's actually the way how it all comes across. And the summary, actually the way I'd like to introduce you, maybe a bit weird. I get to know you very little, but actually you'll come across as a very humble, very capable, very conscious used car sales guy. Because that's essentially what you do. You're selling used cars. So people have a lot of ideas what a used car sales business may be about, but I think you built something really extraordinary based on that. Now, let me open with the first very simple questions. People here may not have an idea, and they need to have a minimum context. What does driversselect do? And maybe you just give a couple minutes of what they do, the build up, and then we're going to dwell with very specific questions in the how, the challenges, and the great practices.
Yeah, well, thank you. And first of all, I mean, what a real treat to be invited into such a thriving community of leaders who just have such great platforms to impact the world. I think just of all the work that I love to do, I love to do the work that brings me alive. And the work that brings me alive is the opportunity to have conversations, share experiences, exchange insights and wisdom with other conscious leaders. So I'm looking forward to this next session, and I think we'll have a lot of fun. And my hope is to just share some of my experiences, and just hopefully they will relate to something that's going on in your organization. And so the kind of the background of driversselect, it's actually now called EchoPark. So I founded the company in 2004. Sold it in 2017 and stayed on to grow the company into a national brand and stepped down in 2019. And the parent company, the Fortune 300 company here in the US that acquired it, had just started piloting a small used car business called EchoPark. And when they bought us, they wanted to convert our business model and culture into the EchoPark brand. So today, you'll find it under EchoPark. It's about a $2 billion national used car retailer. We focus a lot on what we call nearly new vehicles. These are 1 to 4 year old vehicles that are still under the factory warranty, that consumers who are looking for a brand new car, but for whatever reason have difficulty justifying the price of a new car, would rather take a 1 or 2 year old vehicle that has the same technology, the same body style, the comfort of a factory warranty, low cost financing, and save anywhere from 20 to 40%. And so the EchoPark driversselect model focuses on 3 things. One is the opportunity to buy a car well below market, and I can share with you some of the strategies that we've used to be able to retail the same vehicles as other dealers, but well below the market. A lot of it is just through the culture that we built. The second piece is consistent quality, whereas a lot of dealers, especially in the US, they sell new cars and they sell 10-year-old cars. And we've developed a very niche business that focuses on no matter what type of car you buy through us, it's going to have the same consistent, predictable quality, and most of them are going to be under the manufacturer's warranty. And then the third one is, which really has been the biggest challenge for a lot of used car dealers, is the ease of purchase. And they just want to know, what am I buying? What's the history of the car? What's all the cost? What's all the gotchas that it's a very complex purchase here. Lots of financing often involved. At about 70 to 80% of our purchases, the consumer will finance the vehicle. Someone will add extended warranties. So there's a lot of complexity and there's a lot of due diligence. It's very difficult for consumers to really get all the information they need to make the best buying decision for them. And so we try to make that as easy as possible for the consumer. But I think for the audience, it's not really about the size of the company or the success that it has. I think it's a lot more about the journey to get there and kind of how that business was built over time and the learnings. And that's what I hope to do, is really just share with you some of the experiences and the lessons that I've learned that have been really valuable for me.
All right, let's start exactly there, because many folks in the audience, some of them are very exposed to conscious capitalism, some a lot less. And in your case, I just dare to generalize that you didn't start as a conscious leader. One thing you told me, or in one of the interviews, was you started actually using many of the typical tools that you learn in the rule book, you learn in business school, but at some point you did hit a bit of a wall, and you called it something was missing. And I know it wasn't probably one thing, but maybe you can allude a bit like, what was that moment where you realized the classical way doesn't cut it all the way that you felt you want to go to?
Yeah, so let me, I was raised by entrepreneurial parents, and so I've always had that entrepreneurial spirit in me. And when I graduated college in the early 90s, I wanted to go out and explore my entrepreneurial roots. And what I found during that journey is I've launched several businesses, and each one of them had a very common denominator. Most of them got off to really quick starts, lots of early success. And then for some period of time, usually after a few years, the business would cap. And I found it more and more difficult to get over a certain size. And so typically what would happen is I would get burned out, I would get exhausted, or I just find new opportunities and start a new business. And that cycle went for 3 or 4 different businesses where I just reached a point where I couldn't grow them. And so I always thought that there was usually outside market. I just need more talent, or sometimes the market conditions. I was in the wrong industry. It was the wrong timing. But I never really looked at myself. And so then I had the opportunity to join an organization in the Washington, D.C. area, and became president of a group, and was able to work alongside that and grew that from about a $50 million to a $200 million auto retail business. And after a few years, I was like, I want to go back to my entrepreneurial roots. And now I've got a good comfort level of the business. I learned from a very successful owner, and he was so generous in allowing me to stay on another year, hire a few people, document all the things that we have developed. And I said, okay, this is great. Now I have the playbook, I have the experience, I know what works, what doesn't work. Now I really know how to scale. And so as long as I didn't compete with him in the Washington, D.C. area, he would allow me to take all that IP and start over. And I moved to Dallas, Texas. And I chose Dallas because I was on the board of a nonprofit in the automotive industry around auto lending. And that was really the only major city that I had familiarity with. So I said, look, if I know I want to start in a big city, and I had watched an organization called CarMax and the National Football League expand, and the National Football League told me where the population and income was, and CarMax was the largest used car retailer in the U.S. They told me where the used car business is. So as long as I picked a city that had those two things, I felt I was comfortable. And what I experienced was almost exactly what I had been experiencing. I got off to a fast start, was able to grow that business up to about 80, 90 million in revenue, lots of early success, and then struggled and hit that same cap. And I started asking myself well, wait a second, I thought I'd figured all this out. I had the playbook, and I had just scaled an organization to 200 million. Why can't I do it myself? And what I quickly realized was what was holding me back was my own leadership. And if I wasn't willing to address my own leadership gaps, then the business was going to be capped around me and my leadership potential. And so I learned that for me, the greatest restraint to growing a business was my own continuous evolution as a leader. And so what I started to do is I started to surround myself with people who were doing similar work on themselves. And a lot of these folks I found, that's how I found the Conscious Capitalism community. I joined a leadership academy in Dallas called the Stegan organization. And it really spent where I had invested a whole year inside my own leadership. I couldn't look outside to the industry. I couldn't look outside to the general public or my employees. I had to look at myself. And what I found, here's what I found. I found that some of the things that I was doing that were holding the organization back was I was such a big thinker, an idea guy, that I would go in and I would come up with the strategy, but I wouldn't be able, I would zoom out so long, I couldn't bring it back to the day-to-day and be able to connect with people to say, here's our 10-year vision, but here's how it applies to you today. And I would overwhelm them with so many different priorities. I would keep changing and overload new ideas and piling on new ideas. And people started to figure out really quickly that why should we jump all of our energy in this one idea when he's just going to come up with another idea in 3 months? And so let's just wait for the next idea, the next idea, the next. And so none of these ideas really got much traction. And when I learned that I was holding the organization back because I was trying to pour 12 gallons of water in an 8-gallon bucket, and these were all overflowing. So that was one of the things that I had to really slow up and address. And there were other leaderships that I can share with you as well that I had to work on.
What reminds me of is when you mentioned having spent quite some time with Ryan Stegan. Many in the audience may know that agency. There's one sentence that you keep referring to is like, leaders have the organization they deserve. And obviously it refers to them being in charge. They hire, they create the organization, they create the strategy. So if something is dysfunctional, Rand, I guess, helped you a lot to remind you, it starts with you.
I saw it in my own organization. When I was willing to do the work that was mine, they would be able to do the work on themselves, and that created the space. And so when they no longer had to worry about fixing my gaps and they could fix their gaps, everybody started to do their own work. And that's where we really saw the traction, the organization start to build, because my COO, my CFO, my head of sales were doing it, and then the people under them were doing it, and everybody started to adopt this growth mindset. And it was we just built rhythms and routines, and that led to momentum. And we just started focusing a lot more on the real essential things that drove the business. And we started seeing the business grow slowly and slowly. And we broke through the 100 million, we broke through the 500 million, and then we eventually went to the billion. And we couldn't have done that because I was suffocating the business. And I think that's the thing that we realize is leaders get the organization they deserve.
Thanks. Before I get to the next question, guys, I want to remind the audience, I just kind of got us going. First 15 minutes in, and this 45 minutes. Please use the Q&A button, not the chat button. Submit your questions. I'm going to read them, and I'm going to basically inject them as we go. Forgive me if I can't get to all of your questions, but I'll sure that I'll read all of them and then inject them. And don't forget, we will issue a quick survey at the end of this interview. Let me double click on something that you mentioned in terms of development and actually people not filling your gap necessarily. One of the most interesting and provoking quote that I picked up from you is when you said, what sets us apart is vulnerability. So the aspect of being vulnerable seems to be very, very key. And while this word may be associated with weakness, a lot of introspection and never getting anything done, give us maybe a couple of very specific things. How do you do that? How do you practice vulnerability in your company?
You know, I think for me, it started with a mindset, is that I figured that if we were going to do the things that were important to us, which was really to change the way used cars were purchased, we had to be willing to take a new path, something that no one had gone down. And when you take a totally new path, you tend to be forced to disrupt what's currently working and disrupt your own success formula. And that's very difficult for leaders. It's so much safer to just take what's working and do more of that. But we wanted to build a different path. And so what we saw is, if we're going to have to go down a different road that's never been done before, it's going to involve a lot of risk taking. And risk taking can get very, very expensive if you don't have high levels of vulnerability. Because what vulnerability, when people feel safe enough to be able to admit their mistakes, you will know early on in the organization what's working and what's not working. People will ask for help. And it allowed us to recognize mistakes much earlier on. And if we could recognize them much earlier on, we could resolve them at a much lower cost. And we did, the other part about vulnerability is people weren't fearful of being persecuted or judged or held back in their career for making mistakes. And what that did is it encouraged a little bit more risk taking. And so that the risk taking increased the speed of learning. And what we found was people would see that taking a risk is really just a way of learning and growing and figuring out what's working, what's not working, and being able to share that. And the thing that drove vulnerability for us in the organization is I learned that it's how I react to when things don't go well. And that's not just my words, but that's my body language, that's my energy, it's the stories I tell myself. And when I am rewarding and recognizing and motivating and encourage people for vulnerability and thanking them for taking a risk and sharing their learning with us, as opposed to really trying to discipline them for a mistake or talk about the mistakes, and we can't have that. If I react emotionally to that, it'll shut down that vulnerability. And I think that's the biggest lesson that I learned is, if I want people to be more vulnerable, I have to first lead by example. I have to go into the meetings and say, let me share with you some things I tried this week that bombed miserably. Or when things broke down and someone else, like when we had a issue with one of our purchasing strategies, and we ended up having a lot of aging of our vehicles, which really hits profitability hard. And when I had to look at it, and I kept asking the question, and this was the question that I think really drove vulnerability. When I asked the question, how was I complicit in creating this mistake? And I could share that with the group. That gave them the safety to say, okay, it's okay. And so I would look at it and say, you know, with the purchasing strategy, I think I did a poor job of communicating that strategy. And what I meant to say was these things. And, or, hey, I just took a big risk and I communicated this, and I learned that that wasn't the best way to move forward. But the more that I could share with them how I was complicit, and I shared in the mistake with them, and through my own communication or through my own actions, the more comfortable they were to taking risk. And I think that's what really, again, these are little things that I said, when I struggled to get the organization to a certain level, a lot of times is if I wouldn't allow that vulnerability, or I would come down hard on mistakes, what that does is it just caps the growth. And you can't build an innovative model without taking risk, and you can't take risk without making mistakes. And so it's really about creating the conditions that allow that for people to do.
very quickly, before I go to questions that are already submitted and flowing in, on the same note, I think, you implemented challenge councils. What are challenge councils?
So challenge councils were people who had the willingness and ability to see things around you that you don't see. And because they care about your leadership and they care about your success, and they really believe that you care about fixing some of the gaps. So I went around and I created people in the organization and a few outside the organization to give me feedback on the things I was working on. So if I was, I want to say, I want to give you feedback on my energy. Am I bringing positive energy or negative energy into meetings? Give me feedback on that. Or am I focusing on too many priorities? Or am I trying to move too fast and overwhelm people? And they would give me feedback. And here's how I relate it to. I'm a player on the field. So think of a soccer player that's on the field. They have a field view, but they can't see the entire angles of the game. There's coaches on the sidelines that see the same game, but a different angle of that game. And then there's people in the press box that can see the top of the game and the whole field. And then there's people on TV that have more distant view, can see all the multiple different camera angles. As a player on the field, I could only see the field level view, but if I reached to the sideline view and went up to the press box and went out to the camera angles that are on the TV, I had multiple perspectives of the same game, and then I could use that game film to make better decisions on the field. And what I found were people were just showing me things that weren't visible to me. Now, a good example of that is one of the things I wanted to do was, how do we create more vulnerability in some of our more intense meetings? And people would come up to me and say, when you showed up in the meeting, you came right in the room, you sat down, you were on your phone, you didn't even say good morning, you just jumped right into the agenda. And that really shut down a lot of the energy. And if you would have just checked in to say, how's everybody's energy? And so we started introducing questions before each meeting, like especially the weekly meetings that were heavy reporting, heavy metric driven. We would just check in and say, on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being the highest, how present can you be during the next hour? And is there something that's taking away your attention? And sometimes we would find, people would share in those meetings. They would say, my wife's having surgery today, and she just went in, and I'm supposed to get some texts updating me on how she's doing. So I may have a text or two come in during the meeting, and if it's okay, I'd like to check my text on my phone, and I may just be distracted by that. That little piece of evidence was so helpful to me and the group, because if this person started checking their phone, I didn't have to assume that, oh, well, they're just not interested in what I have to say, or they don't really care about the job, or they don't care about, this metric that we're really focusing on. But now I know. And so these are just small little things that Challenge Council can really help give you feedback on.
Thanks. I'm going to pick up a question that came from the audience, actually from Jorge from Lima, Peru. And it's about purpose. I'm going to use that question to ask a twofold question. One is, I'm not just interested in you sharing what is driversselect's purpose. Of course, I will start there, but maybe allude in a couple sentences. How do you think it was critical pulling you into a specific direction? There's a lot of talk, and many people work on a purpose and they have it. How instrumental was it? And the question that Jorge is interested in, which is a bit of a broader, even national American perspective, there's a lot of purpose talk in the corporations around the business roundtable. So do you actually see purpose already at this point in time making an inroad? Do you really see this as getting traction up and beyond your individual company as a recognition from business leaders? And let's keep that answer short, but I thought it's an interesting question looking beyond driverselect where we start.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's hard for me to comment on the intent and effectiveness of what other leaders are choosing to do. I can only speak to my experience and how purpose, I feel, really drove our success. And I'll share that with you and let the audience determine, do they think that this is a viable reason to grow their business? But here's what purpose did for us. I have the belief that most people join an organization with the idea and belief that they have really great talents and they have really good skills that they want to use to make a difference, but they're not going to waste it on an organization that doesn't care about their success and doesn't care about investing in them. And they're going to be, my sense is they're going to be telling themselves, why in the world should I give all my time, energy, and resources to an organization that is not going to allow me to play to my strengths, that's not going to allow me to do meaningful work, that's not going to recognize me for the value I created, and not going to continue to invest and grow my leadership and my personal development. But if you have a strong purpose and people believe in that purpose, what I think you will find is people will say, this is an organization where I can do the best work of my life. And I think the easiest way I would say is just look back at your own experience in work, whether it's you growing the business or you working for another business. When have you done the best work of your life? My guess would be there was a purpose in that era where you're doing the best work of your life, beyond just a paycheck, beyond just a job title. So I believe that the purpose gives people the reason to do the best work of their lives. I believe it's something that pulls people toward a goal faster. I believe it carries people through the tougher times and willing to keep their head down and stay engaged and stay motivated. The other thing a purpose does, and this is, again, my experience, when I launched businesses where the only purpose was to just grow for the sake of growth, to just build a business purely based on revenue and profit, what I found was I was setting goals that were aspirational, but they really weren't personal and authentic to me. And what happens is if you set the wrong goals, you end up going down the wrong path. And when you go down the wrong path, you end up living a lifestyle that you really don't enjoy. And I saw that when I launched, even the early days of driversselect, we really focused on the subprime industry. And what I found was these were people that had major credit problems that wanted to purchase a vehicle, but it was very difficult to get financing. And I thought that, wow, what a great opportunity to serve disenfranchised members of the community that had gone through a tough time, an illness, sickness, divorce, been laid off. And what we found was that purpose, most of the people there, the lenders were very predatory. The consumers really didn't care about rebuilding their credit. They just wanted a nice car. And when they got tired of it, they would turn it back in. And there wasn't a lot of purpose to that business, but the business was growing and growing and growing because there was huge demand. But it imploded for me. And I think I shared this with you. It got so big and I wasn't really enjoying the stakeholders I was dealing with. And so that affected my mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual health. And I just started to burn out. And without a purpose, you end up just setting goals. But then when we developed a purpose around to infect the workplace with highly contagious care, and we could care about creating value for all of our various stakeholders, I got excited about that. I got to work with some incredible lenders like Capital One and Ally Bank that were challenging the industry and the way things are done as I was doing. That was a lot of fun to be serving on their dealer councils and helping them unlock new ways to innovate and retail cars. I got to work with some small mom and pop vendors and help them build the business. And so I could be an entrepreneurial coach for them. I got to work with the employees in our business and help them develop their leadership, which I was passionate about because I was doing the work alongside them, doing that work. I got to see customers who really valued our products and services. And so that's what a higher purpose really does for you. It gives you the opportunity to apply your talents, skills, and resources in an area where you can do the best work of your life.
You mentioned one buzzword, which I know is important to you, and it articulates a lot what your culture would be about. And I know I have a question on that too, which is care. Now, there's a casual way of care, all of us knowing the verb. You use care in a very specific way, which I think is a bit of the heart of what driversselect is about. Tell us more about that.
So CARE was an acronym called Caring Acts Randomly Express. And it was, I think a lot of it was just growing up. My mother was a nurse, and just, I experienced the value of being care forward and showing care in life. And throughout, my life experiences, I've seen that the more I care about people, the more that is returned to me. And I think it's just a wonderful way to enjoy work. And so we believe that Caring Acts Randomly Expressed is something we do small every single day. It's really about taking and caring for the success of others. And when you have enough people around you that you're caring about their success, it's like a rising tide lifting all the boat. Everybody else surrounds themselves around you because they know the more that they lift you up, the more they're going to benefit. But I think when people realize that you don't care about them, they don't want to lift you up because all they believe is you're just doing it to make yourself better. But when they are able to lift you up and they feel that I benefit more, the more I lift you up, the better I become, I think that's where people really start to win. So some of the caring acts that we did is we really started to look at how are people experiencing the decisions that we're making. And I'll give you two examples of that. One is the way we approach pay plans. I remember when I first started out, I went to work for some auto dealers. And the thing that really drove me crazy was after we had a really, really good month, the first day of the next month, the pay plans would change. And I just figured out how to have success on the pay plans. My earnings were going up, and all of a sudden they would just change the pay plan. And sometimes the new pay plan was actually better than the old one, but I didn't know that because it was just happened so randomly. And so what we decided to do is this: anytime that we had to change a pay plan, we would make sure that we gave the employees at least 6 months notice and be able to have them operate on both pay plans simultaneously. And so what that did was, because think about it, if we're going to be, and we knew this going in, that we are going to be innovating and disrupting the way cars are sold. So new skills are going to have to be adopted, and there's going to be new ways to retail cars. And so the pay plans will have to change. And what we basically did was we would say, here's your current pay plan, and here's your new pay plan. And we're going to run those side by side for 6 months. And along the way, we're going to teach you, and we're going to make sure that you have the vision of why we are changing the pay plan. We want to give you clarity on the why. And the second thing is we're going to give you the skills and the training to do it. Then the third thing is we're going to give you the resources to do the job as well, so you don't become frustrated. And then we're going to give you an action plan to make sure you get off to a fast start. And we'll work with you over the next 6 months. And whatever pay plan for the next 6 months is your current or your new one, rewards you more, we're going to give you that one. But at the end of 6 months, you have to make the transition to learn the new skills, adopt the right attitude to be able to use the resources that we give you to make the change. And what we found was that was very acceptable, and they were very comfortable. They no longer had to worry if this month is my income going to drop in half. The second act of care was really from the vendor side, we had a lot of small drivers driving all over the country. And I remember when our parent company bought us, we were shipping cars out of California back into Texas, and they were saying that we ship 5 times, 6 times the number of cars that you ship, but how did you get such good pricing? And we said, we don't really have a contract on the pricing because the cost of fuel varies and the cost of the supply and demand vary. And we just trust our truckers that they're going to give us the best price at the time of the marketplace. And they said, well, how do you know you're doing that? We said, well, we just know that if we care enough about their experience, they'll give us good pricing. They said, well, what does that mean? We said, look, go talk to the truckers. And we were blown away by what this truck driver told our parent company. They came in, they said, look, every day we get orders for cars from California to Texas. And what typically happens is the dealers put it on the network. We accept the order. We deliver the car to Texas. We show up at the dealership. The dealership basically, it's no one there to greet us, no one there where to put the cars. We walk in the showroom. They tell us that we're dirty and greasy and to get out of the showroom because it's offensive to their customers. So we have to wait outside, sometimes in the hot sun. They finally come out and greet us. They tell us to move our trucks and we have to unload them way in the back and bring the cars around. And then we show up for our check and they said, oh, we'll mail it to you. And they string us out for 2 or 3 weeks. He says, it's just not a fun experience. He says at Driver Select, what they do is as soon as we book a car, they call and introduce ourselves and say, hey, Steve, thank you for taking our order. Here's how our system works. Show up at, here's where to pull in. We'll have someone there to greet you. We'll have your check ready for you right when you deliver the cars. And if there's damage done to the cars, we trust you. You'll file with your insurance companies and reimburse us, but we want you to have your money. And then when you get there, we know it's a long trip over. Come into our cafeteria, sit down with us, have some food. There's some snacks you can take back on the road. And the truck driver says, that's a good experience for me. He says, most of the orders that I get those notices on Thursday or Friday, and the dealers want them there over the weekend. He says, I'm a softball coach, and I have to coach my daughter's softball game, and I have to miss that. And she's 9 years old and I want to be there at those games, but I also know that I have to book orders. And it's hard for me to leave and give up that opportunity when I'm treated so poorly. He said, but now I'm willing to do that because Driver Select really cares and they understand the sacrifices that I'm making. And I think those are just small areas of care. And it does not just for the truck driver, but it shows all the employees in your organization too, that you're bringing a sense of humanity into it. And it's just for good business reasons. I mean, yes, it's the right thing to do. But also I believe is if you operate that business, that human beings are critical to your business. And if I look at any function of our business, purchasing, transportation, pricing, retailing, financing, tag and titling of the vehicles, every single one of those involves a human being. And it's my job, I believe, to create the conditions for each of those human beings to do the best work of their lives. And if they feel that they can do the best work of their lives in our organization, we're going to buy vehicles better. We're going to ship them faster. We're going to price them better. We're going to sell them faster. And we're going to create a much better experience for our organization. So a lot of this has really strong business reasons behind it.
Thanks. We have to be short, and we only have 4 minutes left. Before I move to the next question, we have 2 or 3 still on the panel. I know that I'm quick shout out to the audience because we have the pleasure here of having Steve. We had somebody here 2 months ago. We're going to invite another conscious leader in a month. And I'm just shouting out to those people interested to actually develop further. What we're trying to do, this is early fall, is to bring together what we call leadership training, which takes and basically digests all of what leaders like Steve have done and bring it to you. For those of you that are interested to get this in a more condensed fashion, join us. If this is not what you try to do, but more meet like-minded leaders, we have a conscious circle. In Spanish, we call them círculos conscientes. And last but not least, and I'm going to have a question that goes related to that. When anybody out there wonders, well, how am I stacking up against that? Am I on a good track to be a conscious company? And that means many things to many different people. There's a diagnostic on our webpage. If you don't find what you need, you got my email on the back, write to me. The question related to that is, did you actually use profit sharing bonus mechanisms or participation mechanisms in your company? Because there's a lot of talk about care, wonderful, beautiful, which is at the core of creativity, scalability of what you mentioned. Did you use any of those components to get buy-in?
Yeah, so we looked at all kinds of different compensation, and what we landed on was monthly profit sharing based on just the monthly goals. So we would set goals for the business each month, and then the business achieved that. And we had 3 different levels. So we didn't want to just set a high level, and if we hit it, they got it. If they missed it, they didn't get anything. We said if we want to hit a certain level, the first tier will be about 85 to 90% of the goal, and it'll be just a little bonus, because we wanted to get them something. And then there was a mid-level, and then if they exceeded 110%, then they would get a much higher level. And the reason we did that is if we set the level too high in a month, at least they could hit the 85, 90%. But what they found was by the 10th of the month, 11th of the month, they would see that they're already going to hit the first level, and they would kick it in gear. But if you set the level too high and they get halfway through the month and they realize that they're not going to hit the level, they probably just let down. And so it's always important to make that first trigger, even if it's a small sum of money, give them the ability to make sure that they're hitting that consistently, and then they'll push to the second level, and then many times to the third level. We did look at longer term profit sharing or even equity. And what we found was and this was just relevant to our workforce, most of the people were blue collar workers living paycheck to paycheck. And as nice as a piece of equity would have to them, or a long-term retention bonus or stuff, it was so far out there. They just didn't place as much value on that. And so we just figured that there was a lot of need for just day-to-day cash flow, just to pay for childcare or pay for school or pay for gas or pay for a small vacation. That was far more important. And I had to really think about, like, what was important to me was different than was important to them. And so it's really about just understanding their needs.
Steve, thanks. And I don't know if it's coincident or by design, we stopped on time. So we're going to wrap it up here, guys. Thank you a lot. Thanks, Steve. A lot of things that were insightful, and I appreciate your time. This is something that I'm sure is going to inspire a lot of people that are startups, that are conscious leader, or aspire to get there. So thanks a lot. And thanks for the audience for spending the 45 minutes with us.
Well, thank you for allowing me to share my journey.
Thank you, Steve. Bye-bye now.